Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
All right, everyone, ready for a deep dive today?
Ready to go.
Okay, good. So today we're diving into a story that's raising some serious eyebrows.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. This isn't just another news blip. It's got everyone talking about the Trump administration's deportation policies and what they might mean for anyone who dares to speak their mind. We've got an exclusive NPR interview with a top DHS official, and let me tell you, it's more slippery than an eel in a bathtub.
Yeah, I can imagine. The interview is fascinating because it exposes the tension between national security and individual rights. It also forces us to ask, what are the limits of free speech, especially for those who are not U.S. citizens?
Right, exactly. Okay, so before we get into this slippery interview, let's get everyone up to speed. Mahmoud Khalil, he's a Syrian national of Palestinian descent, and here's the kicker: a lawful permanent resident of the U.S. That means a green card, folks. He's married to a U.S. citizen, a recent graduate of Columbia University, so a pretty upstanding guy on paper, right?
Sounds like it. His legal status as a green card holder is crucial here, because it grants him certain protections under U.S. law. And those protections are at the heart of this whole controversy.
And now, Khalil was pretty active in pro-Palestinian activism at Columbia. He was a spokesperson for student demonstrators and even negotiated with the university about divestment from Israel because of the conflict in Gaza.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Divestment, for those who haven't encountered the term, essentially means pressuring an institution to withdraw its investments from certain companies or countries for ethical or political reasons.
Right. So his involvement in these protests seems to be the catalyst for what happened next. You see, the Trump administration has made it clear that they're cracking down on what they call anti-Semitism on college campuses. And this case seems to be a direct result of that policy.
And this is where things take a sharp turn. ICE swoops in, arrests Khalil, detains him in Louisiana, and claims they've revoked his green card. Boom, just like that.
Wow, this move immediately sparked a legal battle, A U.S. district judge actually stepped in ordered a halt to Khalil's deportation while the court examines the arguments from his lawyers.
So you've got this accomplished young man, a legal resident with deep ties to the U.S., and then, seemingly out of the blue, he's arrested by ICE. Now, in the midst of all this, NPR's Michelle Martin sits down with Troy Edgar, the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. You'd think a high-ranking official like Edgar could clearly explain why they arrested Khalil, right? Well, think again.
I think you're right. The interview is notable for Edgar's inability or perhaps unwillingness to offer any specific evidence that links Khalil to terrorism or any violation of U.S. law. This lack of transparency should set off alarm bells for anyone who values due process, the idea that everyone deserves a fair and just legal process.
Absolutely. And Michelle Martin doesn't let him off easy. She keeps pressing for details. What did Khalil actually do? What law did he break? And Edgar's response is, well, let's just say they were about as clear as mud. He tosses out lines like, I think you can see it on TV, right? And I find it interesting that you're not aware.
Those kinds of evasive answers are concerning. They raise serious questions about whether due process was followed in this case. It's one thing to assert that someone poses a threat, but it's quite another to provide actual evidence to support that claim.
I agree. Here's another head-scratcher. Martin points out that Edgar keeps referring to Khalil's visa, but Khalil has a green card. It's a totally different legal status. It's almost like Edgar didn't even have the basic facts of the case straight.
That's a really troubling observation. If the DHS is going to take such drastic action, revoking someone's legal residency, you'd expect them to at least have their facts straight. It makes you wonder how carefully they considered this case before making the arrest.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost as if they were trying to make a point. Send a message to anyone who might be thinking about criticizing U.S. or Israeli policy. And this brings us to a crucial point that Michelle Martin brings up, the events of January 6, 2021. You remember when a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol? She asks Edgar if criticizing the U.S. government is now grounds for deportation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Edgar tries to dodge the question, saying Trump was different because he was, well, Trump.
It's a weak comparison, honestly. The real question here is whether expressing certain political beliefs, even unpopular or inflammatory ones, can be used to justify deporting someone, especially a lawful permanent resident like Khalil.
Absolutely. And Martin drives that point home, asking directly, is any criticism of the Israeli government a deportable offense? And then, is any criticism of the United States government a deportable offense? You could hear a pin drop after those questions because Edgar wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole.
His silence speaks volumes. It fuels the suspicion that Khalil's political views, rather than any actual wrongdoing, are at the heart of this arrest.
Totally agree. Instead of answering, Edgar tries to shift the blame to the Secretary of State, saying it's their call to revoke visas. But again, Khalil has a green card, not a visa. It feels like they're scrambling for any excuse to justify an action that just doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
This case isn't just about Mahmoud Khalil, you know. It raises serious concerns about the erosion of First Amendment rights and the potential chilling effect on free speech, particularly for immigrants and those who dare to criticize those in power.
Now, Edgar and the DHS seem to be arguing that Khalil's activities crossed a line into supporting terrorism, which would justify his arrest and potential deportation. But the problem is they've been incredibly vague about what that line actually is. Where's the evidence? What specific terrorist organization or act of violence are they connecting him to? It's all smoke and mirrors.
Khalil's lawyers are pushing back hard, arguing that this is a blatant attack on his First Amendment rights. They say his involvement in pro-Palestinian protests, even his advocacy for divestment, is protected speech under the Constitution. They're saying the government is trying to punish him for expressing opinions they don't like, which is a huge red flag in a democracy.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to set a precedent, saying, hey, if you speak out against us, even if you're a legal resident, we can come after you. And that's a pretty scary thought.
It absolutely is. This whole situation raises the specter of a chilling effect on free speech. If the government can deport a lawful resident based on vague accusations, simply because he expressed dissenting political views, where does it stop? What message does that send to others who might be thinking about speaking out?
Let's back up a bit and talk about the legal nuts and bolts. Khalil was initially detained by ICE and then moved to a detention center in Louisiana. During this whole process, ICE tells him they're revoking his green card.
Yeah, but then a U.S. district judge steps in and puts the brakes on the deportation?
Right.
That's a really crucial development because it signals that the judge sees merit in Khalil's legal arguments. The judge essentially acknowledged that there are serious due process concerns at play here, and they need to be addressed before Khalil can be deported. You know, due process means that everyone deserves a fair legal process, a chance to defend themselves and be heard.
So what happens next? This whole thing seems like it's going to drag on for a while.
It very well could. Cases like this often take years to work their way through the courts, and given the high stakes involved, both sides are likely to dig in and fight tooth and nail. Khalil's lawyers are challenging the government's attempts to deport him on several grounds, including the violation of his First Amendment rights, lack of due process, and the lack of any real evidence to back up their accusations.
Okay, so while this legal battle plays out, what happens to Khalil? Does he just sit in limbo?
Well, for now, he's safe from being deported because of the judge's order, but he's still in a really precarious situation. The threat of deportation is still hanging over him, and this entire experience has undoubtedly been incredibly stressful for him and his family. They had their lives uprooted based on vague accusations with no evidence, and that takes a toll.
It makes you realize how quickly life can change and how vulnerable we all are to the whims of those in power, even those of us who are legal residents or citizens.
It's a sobering thought for sure, and it highlights why we need to be vigilant about safeguarding our rights and holding our leaders accountable when they overstep their bounds.
This whole case feels like a wake-up call, a reminder that our rights and freedoms aren't just handed to us on a silver platter. We have to actively defend them.
It also underscores the importance of a strong and independent judiciary. The fact that the judge was willing to intervene and halt the deportation proceedings is a big deal. It shows that we have checks and balances in place to prevent the government from acting with impunity.
That's a good point. But even with those checks and balances, there's no guarantee that things will turn out in Khalil's favor. This case is far from over, and the ultimate decision will have ripple effects on the future of free speech and due process in this country.
And it's important to remember that this case isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a larger trend we're seeing, particularly in recent years, of using national security concerns to justify limiting civil liberties. We've seen it with the Patriot Act, the surveillance programs exposed by Edward Snowden, and now with this case.
It's almost like a pendulum swing. We get scared, And we react by giving up a little bit of freedom in exchange for a sense of security. But how much freedom are we willing to sacrifice? And at what point do we start to erode the very foundations of our democracy?
And that brings us to the heart of what makes this case so significant. It forces us to grapple with some very difficult questions about the kind of society we want to live in.
Right. Do we want a society where the government can silence anyone who criticizes its policies? Or do we want a society where open debate and dissent are not only tolerated, but encouraged? Those are questions we all need to be asking ourselves right now.
Absolutely. This case is a microcosm of those larger debates happening in our society today.
Yeah, and it seems like this whole thing with Mahmoud Khalil is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The Trump administration has been pretty open about its agenda to target what they see as radical ideologies.
Right. And this case is a prime example of how that agenda is playing out in real life with real consequences for individuals like Khalil.
It's like they're trying to send a message: step out of line and we'll come after you. And that message is especially chilling for immigrants and minority groups who might already feel vulnerable or marginalized.
Yeah, it creates a climate of fear where people are afraid to speak their minds, afraid to express dissent. And when that happens, it undermines the very fabric of our democracy.
This case also shines a light on how polarized we've become as a society. Issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are incredibly complex with valid arguments on all sides. But instead of having open and honest conversations about these issues, we often resort to name-calling and demonization.
It's like we've lost the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. And that kind of toxic discourse prevents us from finding common ground and moving forward as a society.
For sure. This case also raises some red flags about the balance of power between the different branches of government. The Trump administration hasn't been shy about using its executive power to push its agenda, often bypassing Congress and testing the limits of its authority.
And that's something we need to be paying close attention to. Executive power is an important tool, but it can also be abused. We need a strong system of checks and balances to ensure that no one branch of government becomes too powerful.
I think you're right. So after diving deep into all of this, what can we, the listeners, take away from this story? What can we learn from Mahmoud Khalil's experience?
I think the most important takeaway is that we can't be complacent. We can't take our rights and freedoms for granted. We need to be actively engaged in defending them, whether that means speaking out against injustice, supporting organizations that are fighting for civil liberties, or simply staying informed about the issues that are shaping our world.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed or powerless when faced with these kinds of challenges. But the truth is, every single one of us has a role to play in safeguarding our democracy.
And that starts with being informed, being engaged, and being willing to speak out for what we believe in. We need to have those difficult conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. We need to challenge those in power when they overstep their bounds. And we need to support those who are being marginalized or silenced.
Absolutely. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. If we want to live in a society that values freedom, equality, and justice for all, then we have to be willing to fight for those values.
Mahmoud Khalil's story is a reminder that these values are not guaranteed. They're fragile, and they require constant vigilance and defense.
I agree. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. It's a complex and troubling case, but it's one that forces us to confront some fundamental questions about the state of our democracy and the direction we're heading as a society.
Yeah, we hope this deep dive has provided you with some insights and perspectives that will help you navigate these challenging times.
As always, we encourage you to continue exploring these issues, to engage in thoughtful dialogue with others, and to never stop questioning the world around you, because an informed and engaged citizenry is the foundation of a healthy democracy.
Well said.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.